They said the device couldn't be defused. 7 layers of failsafes, motion sensors, and a timer counting down from 90 seconds. Every explosives expert had declared it impossible. Then Sergeant Hayes walked into the room, looked at the bomb, and whispered, "Not today." What happened next defied every protocol they knew. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories that challenge what we believe is possible in moments of ultimate crisis, consider subscribing. Your support helps bring more untold stories of courage to light. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Forward Operating Base Sentinel in eastern Afghanistan as Sergeant First Class Sarah Hayes reviewed structural engineering reports in her cramped office. At 29, she had spent the last 18 months deliberately avoiding field assignments, content to calculate blast radiuses and reinforce bunkers from behind her desk. Her colleagues knew her as competent but unremarkable, a quiet engineer who submitted thorough reports on time and never volunteered for dangerous missions. What they didn't know was that Sarah Hayes had once been considered the most gifted explosive ordnance disposal specialist in the Army. That was before Kandahar. Before everything changed. Captain Marcus Webb burst through her office door without knocking, his face grim with urgency. "Hayes, we need you suited up in 5 minutes." Sarah looked up from her paperwork, immediately tense. "Sir, I'm not qualified for Field EOD anymore. My certification lapsed 2 years ago." "Your certification didn't lapse," Webb replied sharply. "You refused to renew it. There's a difference." The distinction stung because it was true. After the incident in Kandahar, Sarah had requested transfer to structural engineering, claiming she wanted a change of pace. The real reason remained buried in her classified file. "Captain, I don't do bombs anymore," she said quietly. Webb's expression softened slightly. "Sarah, we have a situation. Compound IED, 7 layers of protection, motion-activated failsafes. Our best people have tried and declared it impossible to defuse. Then evacuate the area and do a controlled detonation," Sarah suggested, the standard protocol rolling off her tongue automatically. "Can't. It's in the children's ward of the hospital in Jalalabad. 43 kids, all too sick to move. The blast radius includes a school and 3 residential buildings." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of impossible choices. "How much time?" "Timer's counting down from 90 minutes when we got the call. That was 20 minutes ago." Through her window, Sarah could see the Black Hawk helicopter spinning up on the landing pad, its rotors beginning their urgent rhythm. Medics were loading equipment, soldiers checking weapons, everyone moving with the precision that came from years of practice with life-and-death situations. "Sir, I haven't worked a live device in 2 years, Sarah insisted. "My hands shake during countdown scenarios. I'm not the person you need." Captain Webb sat down across from her desk. "Hayes, I've read your file. All of it, including the classified sections." Sarah's blood went cold. Few people had access to those records. "Project Defiance," Webb continued quietly. 16 impossible devices defused in 8 months. 0 casualties. You didn't lose your nerve in Kandahar, Sarah. You saved 47 people and blamed yourself for the 3 you couldn't save. The memories came flooding back. The market in Kandahar, children playing near the fruit stalls, the device hidden beneath a vendor's cart. She had identified it, but there hadn't been time to evacuate everyone. When it detonated during her approach, 3 civilians died despite her successful defusal of the primary charge. "Those 3 people died because I was too slow," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those 3 people died because terrorists planted a bomb in a marketplace," Webb corrected. 47 people lived because you were faster than anyone thought possible." Sarah stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, the helicopter crew was performing final checks. She could see the urgency in their movements, the controlled chaos of a military operation under time pressure. "The device in Jalalabad?" she asked without turning around. "What's the configuration?" Webb consulted his notes. compound IED with 7 distinct trigger mechanisms: pressure plates, motion sensors, temperature changes, timer, anti-tampering charges, remote detonation capability, and what our guys think might be a heartbeat sensor. Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the device from Webb's description. 7 layers meant redundancy, multiple pathways to detonation. It wasn't just a bomb, it was a puzzle designed to kill anyone who tried to solve it. Heartbeat sensor? She asked. Our tech thinks it's designed to detonate if someone gets close and then their heart rate spikes above a certain threshold. Basically, it kills anyone who gets scared. Sarah almost smiled at the cruel irony. A device that would kill anyone normal enough to fear it. Who else has tried? She asked. Staff Sergeant Martinez, our best current EOD tech. Sergeant First Class Thompson from Delta. Even brought in a Navy SEALs specialist from Bagram. All of them got within 5 feet and had to retreat. Why? Because they're not you, Hayes. They don't see patterns the way you do. Sarah turned back to face Webb. In his eyes, she saw the weight of 43 children's lives. She also saw something else. Faith in abilities she had tried to forget. If I do this, she said slowly, I work alone. No spotters, no comms, no one watching over my shoulder. Hayes, that's against every protocol? Those are my terms, she interrupted. The heartbeat sensor won't trigger if there's only one person present, and I need absolute silence to think. Webb nodded reluctantly. Done. What else? If I don't make it out, don't send anyone else in. Do the controlled detonation and accept the casualties. Don't let my failure kill more people. You're not going to fail. Sarah looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. Everyone fails eventually, Captain. The question is whether we fail trying or fail by not trying at all. 30 minutes later, Sarah stood outside the Children's Hospital in Jalalabad, wearing a full EOD suit that felt both familiar and foreign after 2 years. The weight of the armor, the restricted vision through the helmet, the way her breathing echoed in the confined space, it all came rushing back. The hospital had been evacuated except for the children's ward on the 3rd floor. Medical staff had moved as many patients as possible, but 43 children remained, too critical to survive transport. Their life support machines hummed quietly through the building's emergency power system. Local police had established a perimeter 3 blocks away. Inside that perimeter, Sarah was alone with a device designed to kill her and 43 children who depended on her success. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step measured and deliberate. The device was in room 312, according to the initial reconnaissance team. A compound IED hidden beneath a hospital bed where a 7-year-old girl lay unconscious, recovering from shrapnel wounds sustained in a previous attack. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Someone had placed a bomb under a child who was already a victim of war, using her as both shield and trigger for maximum psychological impact. At the door to room 312, Sarah paused. Through the small window, she could see the little girl on the bed, surrounded by monitors and IV lines. Beneath the bed, she could make out the dark outline of the device. Sarah activated her helmet recorder, speaking quietly into the microphone. This is Sergeant Hayes beginning EOD approach on compound device. Time mark 1437 hours. Timer showing approximately 41 minutes remaining. She opened the door and stepped inside. The device was exactly as described. A nightmare of wires, sensors, and explosive charges arranged in a configuration that seemed designed more to intimidate than to function efficiently. But that was the point. Fear was the enemy's greatest weapon. Sarah knelt beside the bed, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. Up close, the device was even more complex than she had imagined. 7 distinct trigger mechanisms, each connected to enough explosive to bring down the entire building. Okay, she whispered to herself, falling back into the methodical approach that had made her legendary in EOD circles. "Let's see what you've got." She began with reconnaissance, using a small mirror to examine the device from multiple angles. The timer showed 38 minutes and counting down. Not much time, but enough if she worked efficiently. The pressure plates were standard military issue, probably salvaged from American equipment. The motion sensors appeared to be commercial security devices, modified for lethal application. The temperature sensors were crude but effective. Any significant heat change would trigger detonation. But it was the heartbeat sensor that concerned her most. A small device mounted on the top of the bomb, pointed upward toward anyone who would approach. If her heart rate exceeded a certain threshold, it would interpret that as fear and detonate immediately. Sarah closed her eyes and began the meditation technique she had learned during her specialist training. Slow, controlled breathing. Visualization of successful completion. Most importantly, acceptance of the possibility of failure without allowing that acceptance to become fear. When she opened her eyes, her heart rate had dropped to 60 beats per minute, well below any trigger threshold. She began with the timer mechanism, the most straightforward of the 7 systems. Using tools that felt familiar despite their long disuse, she carefully traced the connections until she found the primary wire. One cut, and the timer stopped at 31 minutes, 14 seconds. One down, 6 to go. The pressure plates required a different approach. Rather than disarming them, she needed to gradually redistribute the weight they were monitoring. Using thin metal shims, she slowly transferred the load from the plates to the floor around them. After 20 minutes of patient work, she was able to disconnect them safely. 2 down, 5 to go. The motion sensors were next. These required absolute stillness while she worked. Any vibration above their threshold would trigger immediate detonation. Sarah moved with the deliberate precision of a surgeon, each motion calculated and controlled. As she worked, she became aware of sounds from the children's ward around her. Monitors beeping, ventilators cycling, the quiet sounds of young lives being sustained by machines. It was a reminder of what was at stake, not just the children in this room, but all the others whose lives depended on her success. After disabling the motion sensors, she moved on to the temperature detectors. These were triggered by heat changes, which meant she had to work quickly before her body heat accumulated in the small space. Using cooling packs from her kit, she created a thermal barrier while she located and disconnected the sensors. 4 down, 3 to go. The anti-tampering charges were the most dangerous, designed to detonate if any of the other systems were disabled incorrectly. They served as a backup to ensure the device would explode even if partially disarmed. Sarah had to trace each connection carefully, ensuring she understood the complete circuit before making any cuts. As she worked, sweat began to accumulate inside her helmet despite the cooling system. The weight of the EOD suit, which had felt manageable at first, now seemed oppressive. But she maintained her breathing rhythm, keeping her heart rate steady. The little girl in the bed stirred slightly, making a small sound in her sleep. Sarah paused, looking at the child's face. 7 years old, maybe 8, about the same age as the children who had died in Kandahar. "Not today," Sarah whispered, echoing the words she had spoken when she first saw the device. "Not on my watch." She completed the anti-tampering circuit disconnection and moved on to the remote detonation capability. This required locating and disabling the receiver that would accept a signal from outside the building. After 15 minutes of careful work, she found it and severed its antenna connections. 5 down, 2 to go. The heartbeat sensor and one final system remained. According to her initial assessment, the 7th system appeared to be a backup timer, hidden within the device's primary structure. But as she examined it more closely, she realized it was something else entirely. It was a dead man's switch. If her heart stopped beating, if she collapsed from exhaustion, was killed by one of the other systems or died from any other cause, the device would detonate automatically. The terrorists had anticipated that someone might successfully disable the other 6 systems, so they had built in a final failsafe that required the diffuser to remain alive and present. Sarah sat back on her heels, considering the implications. She could disable the heartbeat sensor that would trigger if she became too afraid, but the dead man's switch required her continuous presence. Even if she successfully disarmed the device, she would have to remain with it indefinitely, unless she could find a way to fool the sensor. Using her tools, she carefully examined the dead man's switch. It was monitoring for the specific electromagnetic signature of a human heartbeat within a certain range. Crude, but effective for its intended purpose. Then she remembered something from her specialist training. The cardiac monitors in the children's ward would be producing similar electromagnetic signatures. If she could redirect one of those signals to the device's sensor, it might be enough to convince the system that she was still present even after she left. Working carefully, she traced the power lines running through the hospital room. Medical equipment required dedicated circuits, isolated from the building's general electrical system. If she could tap into the cardiac monitor attached to the little girl. It was a desperate plan, requiring her to interface an IED with life support equipment. One mistake could kill the child she was trying to save, but it was the only option that didn't require her to remain with the device forever. Sarah carefully connected a bypass wire from the cardiac monitor to the dead man's switch, creating a parallel circuit that would feed the child's heartbeat to the bomb's sensor. As long as the little girl remained alive and connected to the monitor, the device would believe Sarah was still present. She tested the connection carefully, ensuring the monitor's function wasn't compromised. The little girl's vital signs remained stable, unaware that her heartbeat was now protecting 43 lives. Finally, Sarah addressed the heartbeat sensor that monitored her own fear response. This was the simplest to disable, requiring only the removal of its power source. But she had to remain completely calm during the disconnection. Any spike in her heart rate would trigger immediate detonation. She closed her eyes again, centering herself with the meditation techniques that had saved her life multiple times before. When she opened them, her heart rate was barely above resting. With steady hands, she disconnected the heartbeat sensor's power supply. 7 down, device safe. Sarah sat quietly for a moment, hardly believing it was over. Then she activated her radio, speaking to the command post for the first time since entering the building. "This is Hayes. Device is secure, all systems disabled. Hospital is safe for re-entry." The response was immediate and jubilant. Within minutes, medical staff were rushing back into the building to check on their patients. EOD specialists arrived to remove the now harmless device. Military personnel secured the area and began investigating how the bomb had been placed. But Sarah remained in room 312, sitting beside the bed of the little girl, whose heartbeat had made the final solution possible. The child was awake now, looking at Sarah with curious dark eyes. "Hello," the girl said in accented English. "Hello," Sarah replied, removing her helmet for the first time in hours. "How are you feeling?" "Better," the girl said simply. "Are you a soldier?" Sarah considered the question carefully. For 2 years, she had tried to convince herself she was just an engineer, someone who built things rather than someone who prevented their destruction. "Yes," she said finally, "I'm a soldier." Later that evening, Sarah found herself in Captain Webb's office, filling out the after-action reports that followed every EOD operation. The paperwork was routine, but the conversation was not. "Washington is interested in your technique," Webb said. "Apparently using medical equipment to fool a dead man's switch is a new one for the books." It was improvisation, not technique, Sarah replied. Desperate circumstances. Desperate circumstances seem to bring out your best work, Webb observed. The question is whether you're ready to acknowledge that. Sarah set down her pen and looked at him directly. You mean whether I'm ready to go back to active EOD duty? I mean, whether you're ready to stop punishing yourself for Kandahar. The comment hit harder than Sarah expected. She had spent 2 years convincing herself that her transfer to engineering was about wanting a safer assignment. But Webb was right. It had been self-imposed exile, penance for the 3 people she couldn't save. Today could have gone wrong in a dozen different ways, she said quietly. If that little girl's heart monitor had malfunctioned, if I had miscalculated the sensor's range, if any of 100 variables had been different, but they weren't different, Webb interrupted. You read the situation correctly, adapted to circumstances no one had anticipated, and saved 43 lives. Plus however many people would have died in the surrounding buildings. Sarah nodded, but remained silent. Hayes, I'm authorizing your return to active EOD status, Webb said formally. Your certification will be renewed effective immediately, but I want you to understand something. Sir? This isn't about the Army needing your skills, though we do. This is about you needing to forgive yourself for being human. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about the little girl in the hospital. The child would recover fully, according to the medical staff. She would grow up never knowing that her heartbeat had saved dozens of lives, never understanding the role she had played in defeating terrorism through the simple act of staying alive. Perhaps that was the real lesson of Project Defiance, Sarah thought. Sometimes the most powerful weapons against fear and hatred were the most basic human qualities: courage, persistence, and the refusal to give up on life. 3 months later, Sergeant First Class Sarah Hayes was leading EOD training exercises at Fort Bragg, teaching the next generation of specialists the techniques that had made her legendary. Her students knew her as demanding but fair, someone who pushed them to exceed their own expectations. What they didn't know was that she still carried the memory of every device she had faced, every decision that had meant the difference between life and death. The weight of that responsibility had once nearly broken her, but now it served as a reminder of why the work mattered. During a break between training sessions, Sarah received a package with no return address. Inside was a drawing in crayon showing a soldier in an EOD suit standing next to a hospital bed. At the bottom, in careful English letters, was written, "Thank you, soldier lady. Love, Amira." Sarah smiled, remembering the little girl whose heartbeat had made the impossible possible. Some missions ended with explosions and casualties, but the best ones ended with children who would grow up to draw pictures and dream of futures that terrorism couldn't destroy. She pinned the drawing to the wall of her office, where it remained as a reminder that sometimes the greatest victory was simply ensuring that life continued, one heartbeat at a time. Final question: from which city are you watching this video today? If you enjoyed this story of courage under impossible pressure, subscribe to discover more tales of heroes who refuse to accept defeat when lives hang in the balance.